Hi, kids. How you doing? As we start out our World War One study, we talked a little bit already about kind of the big ideas, and we're starting out here with kind of how did this all happen? It was a long time ago now, but really this is the beginning of sort of the modern world that you and I have grown up in, and a lot of the things that we have come to know very well sort of got their start during this time, for good and in a lot of cases for bad. So we'll be kind of learning about that over the course of the over the next uh, month or so as we do this. But this is our first article that we're going to read, and this one is entitled "The Guns of August." So if you could please follow along while I read. World War One: The Guns of August, the Road to War. As the 20th century began, the continent of Europe developed tension that would eventually lead to the most destructive war the world had ever seen. For hundreds of years, Britain and France built empires that extended to the furthest corners of the world. Germany unified as a nation in the late 1800s and within a year defeated France in 1871 in a short war called the Franco-Prussian War. Very quickly, the new country also began following a policy of imperialism, or building empires. The problem, at least in Germany's estimation, was most of the world was already carved up into empires held by Britain and France, as well as the Netherlands, Portugal, and others. The only way Germany could possibly build an empire as impressive as Britain or France's was by taking colonies away from some other empire. This desire by Germany to use force to gain what they wanted led to a spirit of militarism, or glorification of the military. In Germany, unwavering support for the military became more important than individual rights or critical thinking. The nation developed along those lines for its first 40 years. At the same time, this spirit of militarism mixed with nationalism, which was pride in one's nation or ethnic group. This combination created a situation in Europe where countries were looking for a fight, whether one was needed or not. And there you see what Europe looked like about 100 years ago, a little bit more than that now. This part of Europe is pretty much the same now as it was back then in many ways. This part has changed a whole lot. And we're going to kind of learn about that over the next little while and why that occurred. In order to protect themselves against stronger neighboring nations, countries banded together into alliances and pledged to protect each other if any of the members were attacked. Germany and the Austria-Hungary Empire formed the Central Powers. They chose that name because they were in the center of Europe. Britain, France, Russia, and many of the smaller nations of Europe created an alliance simply known as the Allies. The Boiling Cauldron. As 1914 began, the Balkan region of southeastern Europe was a particularly dangerous combination of imperialism and nationalism. The Austria-Hungary Empire ruled much of that area and had for hundreds of years. Austria was a German-speaking nation, but the rest of the empire was a combination of hundreds of different nationalities, ethnic groups, and religions. Probably the most symbolic of the polyglot nature of Central and Southern Europe is the country of Bosnia-Herzegovina. Many different ethnic groups and three different major religions all reside there. The Serbs are Orthodox Christians, the Croats are Roman Catholic, and the Bosnians are Muslim. All three groups live together, sometimes peacefully, often, disputes flared up that led to eruptions of violence. The Bosnian capital city of Sarajevo was known as the most troubled part of the Austria-Hungary Empire. With that in mind, the heir to the Austrian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, went to Sarajevo along with his wife Sophie to try and calm down ethnic tensions that threatened to destabilize the entire region. And here you see a picture of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie, and this was only minutes before they were assassinated. While driving through the streets of Sarajevo in his brand new car, Ferdinand and Sophie were assassinated by Serbian nationalists. The group, called the Black Hand, wanted to see Bosnia leave the Austrian Empire and join the neighboring nation of Serbia. The dominoes fall. When Ferdinand was assassinated, it set off a chain reaction that began the conflict known as World War I. Everything that followed, which changed the world forever, really did not have very much to do with the assassination. Of course, anytime someone dies, it is a tragedy. But the assassination of Ferdinand and Sophie was not a reason for an entire continent and then an entire world to go to war. It had little to do with that. It was about countries settling scores from years before and trying to change the balance of power in Europe. First, Austria-Hungary declared war on the nation of Serbia, since that is where the assassins came from. Russia considered itself Serbia's protector, so they declared war on Austria-Hungary. Russia also wanted land that bordered the two countries. But then Germany, who hardly needed an excuse to pick a fight, declared war on Russia. The Germans looked at the huge country and saw a relatively weak foe with massive land holdings that would be easy to defeat in war. Germany's empire would likely come at Russia's expense. Knowing, though, that Russia's allies, Britain and France, would not just sit by and let Germans grab thousands of square miles of Russian land, they declared war on France too. Since France was easily the most powerful nation, Germany invaded there through neutral Belgium first. The Germans knew it would take Russia months to get prepared for war, and it was hoped the war with France would already be over by the time that happened. Once Germany declared war on France, Britain entered the war by declaring war on Germany. Now the entire continent of much of the world was at war, all from the spark of one relatively obscure assassination. And here we see, much kind of the surprise of a lot of people is people loved the idea of going to war in 1914. You got people here in London and England cheering for it. You can see that kind of everyone's excited. And here in Munich, same sort of thing. Munich's in Germany. Now, what ended up being a little bit weird is they actually found in this crowd, there's the little circle right there, that is a very young Adolf Hitler who was cheering along with everybody else. Now, at that point, Hitler was just a guy. Nobody knew him. He had no friends and was not even from Munich. So he just was just another guy. And he would eventually join the German army, and that would kind of start his rise. But for World War I, he's just another person who lived through it, and that's about it. He would kind of become more important later on. The Massacre of the Innocents. Germany quickly invaded Belgium in order to get to France more easily. Belgium wanted to stay neutral in the war and was not prepared at all for an invasion. The Belgians were quickly thrown into the Allies and spent the rest of the war trying to evict the German army from their homeland. In the first few weeks of the war, the British, French, and Belgian Allied army was no match for the Germans. The Germans pushed deep into France and threatened to capture the French capital city of Paris. Thousands of French troops rushed to the front in every vehicle possible, including taxicabs, and stopped the German army just outside Paris at the Battle of the Marne. Up until this moment, World War I looked a lot like the Franco-Prussian War between Germany and France back in 1871. That war took only a few weeks, and everyone kind of figured this war would be just like that one. Germany looked like they were going to win easily. Things changed, though, after the Battle of the Marne. The war slowed down. The Germans, once stopped, could not get going again. The Allies also could not move the Germans backward either. The war turned into a stalemate or deadlock where neither side could win a decisive victory. That word stalemate we're going to see over and over and over and over again. Okay, and there you see the trenches when you see a picture like this is World War I. Okay, the hundreds of guys in these trenches that they dug down into the earth, that pretty much was unique to that war. Since neither army could move the other, they dug down into the ground, creating trenches that stretched from the English Channel across France all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. Armies would attack each other across the scarred land in between the trenches, known as no man's land. The men in the trenches were usually pretty safe, while ones attacking typically died by the thousands. Trench warfare made sure the stalemate continued. What made World War I different than earlier wars was new technology, which made old tactics useless. What worked in war for hundreds of years now no longer was effective at all. Terrifying new weapons such as machine guns and poison gas made casualties enormous compared to what armies were accustomed to losing. A battle might have once cost a few hundred men, but now thousands were dying every hour with no victories, no movement, and no end in sight. He kept us out of war. In the United States, opinion about the war was divided. Many people favored the Allies as fellow democracies. Some Americans, though, had their own reasons for preferring the Central Powers to the Allies. In order to sway opinion to the Allied side, the British used propaganda, which distorted truth designed to show only one side of the story. These days, we would refer to that as fake news. The German army was accused of numerous atrocities, such as killing women and children in Belgium. Most of these claims turned out to be exaggerated or completely false. The real tragedy of Allied propaganda in World War I happened 25 years later in World War II. When tales of German atrocities really were true, many did not believe them because the ones in World War I were false. The USA came closer to entering the war when German submarines attacked and sank the passenger ship Lusitania off the Irish coast. Many Americans were aboard only for a vacation, but the Germans considered them fair game in British waters. Then news of the Zimmerman telegram reached the U.S. This was a message from Germany to Mexico offering to help get land lost to the USA in the Mexican-American War if Mexico joined the Central Powers. Mexico had zero interest in entering the war, but Germany apparently offering to help dismantle the United States pushed the USA toward the Allies. In fact, the Allies badly needed U.S. help. Russia was one of the major allies, but had a revolution and overthrew the Tsar, the Russian king, in 1917. When Russia dropped out of the war, the USA was just starting to arrive after entering the war on the Allied side in April 1917.